Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. We're going to switch up the format a little bit, probably ongoing. We've been doing 250 plus individual interviews, and we'll continue to do that. But I think there's more interest in doing some other interesting things among anarchists and about anarchy and about our philosophy and things like that. And so this is going to be our first actual debate, sort of anarchist fight night, fight club here, about what's happening with Donald Trump. This has been one area that has really sort of erupted in the libertarian and anarchist community about Donald Trump. There seems to be some libertarians have really gone and supported Donald Trump a lot, and I'd include people like Stefan Molyneux on there, past Anarchast guest. I haven't talked to him in a long time. He's in his own world doing his own thing, but I've definitely noticed he's been talking a lot about Trump and definitely seems to be quite pro-Trump. And there's a number of others out there, and one of them is actually Richard Heathen, a past Anarchast guest, the host of Liberty Machine News, also documentary maker that I've been on one or two of his documentaries. He's definitely pro-Trump. He's an anarchist as well, and of course then there's Adam Kokesh of the book Freedom, which is doing incredibly well, and Adam versus the Man, known for getting beat up while he danced at the Jefferson Memorial and stupidly shooting a video of himself loading a shotgun in Washington District with criminals and being in solitary confinement. I'm sure most of you know who he is. So I have them both on because they both have very differing opinions on this. And in fact, Richard Heathen was incensed when Adam Kokesh recently put out a video saying that all anarchists who support Trump are cucks. So I'm just gonna sit back like you guys and watch these guys duke it out and just see if we can come to some interesting conclusions about what we should all be thinking about this particular situation. So, Richard, I'm going to let you take the first pulpit here. You can say your opinion on what's going on first, and then we'll let Adam respond to you.
Well, I support Trump because, honestly, he's an agent for change. If you look at all the people who are attacking him, you've got far left-wing communists, and you've got basically the Republican and Democrat establishment. You've got the people, who were attacking Ron Paul. If we all recall Ron Paul's 2012-2008 presidential race, which actually was what made me a libertarian, you've got the same people who were attacking him, attacking Ron Paul, attacking Donald Trump. And so, I think right now is a time for action where we can actually have some change. Now, Trump's not a perfect libertarian, but he's good on some key issues. Number one of those is foreign policy. He's talked about getting out of NATO, retreating from foreign interventionism abroad, which I think is a hugely important issue. And I guess this is a conversation about pragmatism versus principle, and it's a very important conversation because for me, I think it's a line that we have to cross, because if we're so stuck into principles, if we allow our principles to become a dogmatic cult of ideology, then we don't accomplish anything. So it's really important. Now, Trump's said nice things about Putin, and Putin said nice things about Trump. So I think that would be that's a good indication that there would be a de-escalation of tensions between the United States and Russia if Trump were to come to power. Also, you've got Walter Block, who founded the Libertarians for Trump movement. I'm going to borrow a little bit from his arguments. You've got overseer goody, overseer baddie. Overseer goody beats you once a month. Overseer baddie beats you once every day. Just because you would rather be beaten once a month instead of once a day doesn't mean that you're a fan of being beaten. It's a preferable alternative. Now I'll let Adam, respond to what I've said.
Well, I would just have a couple of questions to further examine this position. You say that he's an agent for change. Wasn't Obama an agent for change? Is he any less an agent for change than, say, Bernie Sanders or, any other candidate who's not running as deliberately the status quo candidate? You say
I'm glad you asked me that, Adam, because if you look at how the media and the establishment was towards Obama, and you look at how they are towards Trump, there is a significant difference. If you look, the media was welcoming and basically opened Obama up with open arms. They welcomed him with open arms. Trump, on the other hand, I have not seen a candidate who's been attacked by the media and the political establishment as much since Ron Paul in 2012.
Okay, well, the enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend, but your point is kind of just irrelevant if you count for the fact that what Trump actually benefits from the media coverage is coverage. And if anything, Ron Paul got ignored more than attacked. He got attacked in the sense that he was called irrelevant, and then the media made him irrelevant. But in the case of Trump, he's actually benefited from an overwhelming amount of media coverage, and the more he gets covered, the more popular he is. And I think the media, at least the ones, the people really pulling the strings
Could
on
I
the
respond
media,
to that? Because I'd really like to respond to that. I think you have a very valid point where Trump is benefiting from media coverage. But if you look early on in the campaign, he was not covered barely any at all. Like, he was kind of treated as a sideshow, and he wasn't given serious coverage. He wasn't really given serious coverage.
Hold on. We can go back and look at the statistics on that, but his announcement speech was thoroughly covered and analyzed and commented on.
Oh, sure, it was, but it wasn't so much in a serious way. He was treated. Here's the thing: Donald Trump is a celebrity. He's on television. He was treated as a celebrity. If Ron Paul had that same celebrity, he probably would have been treated in that same vein. You know what I mean? It's not like a congressman, unnamed congressman is the exact same as a person who's been highlighted in the media for about 40 years.
Okay, I mean, I'm not convinced, but if your argument centers on him being an agent for change, I don't think you have any way of showing that he is more so than any other particular candidate, and showing that how he's talked about in the media doesn't really back up that assertion at all.
Why not? He's demonized. He's been called horrible things, the same as Ron Paul was. Ron Paul was sidelined, but when he did make himself relevant by having a mass movement behind him, he was treated poorly. He was dismissed. He was called
hold on.
a kook. He was called this.
So you're saying that the way that Trump is treated by the media is proof of your assertion that he's an agent for change?
Well, I'm saying that he's a outsider. He's a political outsider. He is not part of the political establishment, and that is proof by the way he's being treated by the Republican establishment and by the media.
You could say the same thing.
Let me ask you this,
say the
Adam.
same thing about Bernie Sanders.
If Trump was actually an outsider, if he was what Richard says he is, would you support him?
I don't think so, because he's still someone who's not. Yeah, I mean, the lesser evil is still voting for evil, and I don't think that's something that we should be supporting.
Well, the thing is,
would you, if Ron Paul was running in 2016, would you support him, Adam?
Say again?
If Ron Paul was running in 2016, would you support him?
Yes, absolutely, because he's a voluntarist, okay. and I might disagree with a couple of his particular applications of that, but I believe he shares. I mean, he's a libertarian. He has a libertarian philosophical grounding that Trump doesn't, and I think that's a major criteria for someone who should be, worthy of active support. But one of the problems with our movement, and Richard, one of the things you said was that we can't be too rigid in our principles.
Well, those aren't my exact words. I said we shouldn't be reduced to ideological dogmatism.
Okay, well, not supporting Trump is not ideological dogmatism. That's just smart behavior for someone who believes in freedom. But
I respectfully disagree.
Well, if you'd stop interrupting, I mean, I could at least get a couple thoughts out here, because if you compromise your principles, then they're not really principles in the first place. And if you say we want to be bound by principles, yeah, I do want to be bound by my principles. That's the point of them being principles. And you say, like, the movement's not going to get anywhere if we aren't flexible enough, or if we're not strategic enough, or something like that. And if you talk about supporting Trump as how we do that, well, if anything, you're saying that the principles don't matter. If we don't stick to, if the movement towards freedom is based on principles like self-ownership and the non-aggression principle and, basic ethics and decency and morality, then if we compromise those, then we're saying that they don't matter. So
well,
yeah,
here's
you
the
can
thing.
be.
What is the point of having principles if we're so rigid in them that we don't accomplish anything? Now, I get that Trump's not perfect, but he's the best of a bad lot, and he has actually some policies that are okay. Now we can sit in our echo chamber and pound our chest about how ideologically pure we are, or we can take the real world as it is and use and apply our principles to try and make change. Now, I think the argument is that basically we're not going to end the state by November. So, Adam, do you have a coherent plan to end the state by the next election?
Not by the next election, but that's not the criteria about whether or not we should support Trump. Now, if you want to talk about not accomplishing anything, if you're a principle-based movement and you're willing to support things that are outside of your principles, you're not growing that movement. And see, this is the problem with a lot of people who are not quite libertarians. And I don't know you well enough. I can't read your mind. I don't know if you're a conservative who's pretending to be a libertarian in order to get me to support Donald Trump. But as far as I can tell, if you really wanted to further the cause of liberty, you'd be supporting candidates who are waking people up or working to wake people up yourself rather than supporting someone who actually entrenches statism further. I want to get stuff done. I want to accomplish a voluntary society. And the way we do that is by changing the paradigm and waking people up one at a time. I don't know when we get to critical mass for that, but I know that we have to get to critical mass for that before we can abolish the state. And if you want to waste your breath and energy supporting Donald Trump, I mean, that's fine. You have that right. But I'm going to invest my time and energy in things that actually work towards achieving a free society as opposed to working backwards from that. Because when you're supporting Trump, you're saying that his positions are good. You're saying that his worldview is something that you want to endorse and support and for other people to embrace. That's the last thing I want. The last thing I want is for people to be more safe. I'm not
endorsing him as a person, and I'm not endorsing him as every last one of his policies, but I'm saying of all the people who are likely to win the presidency in November, he's the best. And the fact of the matter is, why should libertarians not, seeing as there is going to be a president, why should libertarians not exert their influence and picking the one candidate who best exemplifies their policies?
Because instead of exerting our influence to help the American people choose a flavor of statism, we should be exerting all of our influence to get them to embrace freedom.
Well, this is great. This is all about.
Can we do both? I don't see anything wrong with doing both. And let me ask you this, Adam.
Jeff, if I can address that exactly, absolutely.
Sure.
We can do both. And if I had a proposition that I suggested as a resolution for this as a debate, which was, if you believe in the doctrine of free will and want to help advance humanity towards a free society, you should actively, vocally, and publicly support Donald Trump's candidacy for president. That's not endorse, that's not donate to, but that you should invest energy into supporting him. And I would, if you want to say, Richard, that you're going to fall back on your position, hey, I'm not supporting him. I'm just saying that of the most likely to win, and I'm going to make that criteria by they have, within 25% chance of winning the presidency. Yes, he's the least evil. Well, hey, I agree with you. I don't disagree with that there. But it's like, what are you wasting your time doing anything beyond that, supporting it or even examining it?
Now you're kind of putting words in my mouth. That's not the only thing I do to support liberty, Adam. It's one thing.
I didn't say it was.
One policy, one initiative. There's a president. There's a president that's going to be elected of all the people that have the chance, because the United States is a two-party system. So it's, at this point, it's probably going to be Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. I think it's of great consequence who that president is. And I think Donald Trump will allow Western civilization the chance to continue, so we can move forward down the road to liberty.
First of all, if you want to make that case with Trump, I would say that I'm more concerned with waking people up. That's how we actually achieve a free society. And the idea of, well, he's going to move us a little bit in the other direction is a kind of a dangerous consequentialist argument that could just as well go the other way.
No, it's not a dangerous consequentialist argument because we have an actual system. Here's the thing. There's going to be a president, man. Why is it so bad to pick the one guy who's going to continue things? Western civilization is on the brink. We need someone who's going to basically not throw it down the shitter so we actually can continue, because
Maybe
changing
we need someone
civilization
to
isn't
throw
going to
it down
happen
so that
overnight.
people
It's
can
going
wake
to.
up.
It's a long-term thing. We were a lot closer to the principles of liberty 100 years ago, but because of ideological subversion, we've moved away from
hold
that
on.
to
100 years.
leftism.
Wait, hold on a second. You're saying 100 years ago. 100 years ago, when
The state was a lot smaller.
Was it when women couldn't vote? When before prohibition?
Voting isn't a measurement of liberty, my friend.
Excuse me?
Voting
is not a measurement of liberty.
I think we'd all agree with that. This is kind of interesting to me. This seems to be an argument about. I'd like to hear Adam respond to Walter Block's statement. So, Adam, just put in that context, if you're given just two options, to be beaten once a month or to be beaten once a day, Richard's saying, why wouldn't you just choose or throw some effort towards being chosen to only be beaten once a month?
Well, that's an important challenge to the position of supporting someone who actually believes in freedom, but it doesn't really hold a whole lot of water because it's a gross oversimplification. Because if that were the case, and it was perfectly in a vacuum, that was the only choice, and you could be beaten more or less often, sure, of course. What sane person wouldn't choose to be beat less often? But in reality, there's another option, which is to work towards ending the beatings entirely. So really, it's do you want to vote for being beaten once a week, or do you want to vote for being beaten twice a week, or do you want to work so that maybe in a month you're never going to be beaten at all? And
those aren't mutually exclusive positions.
I didn't say that they were. So you can stop bringing out these red herrings, because what I'm saying is that our energy should be directed to that which actually works to achieve a free society most efficiently, and that's waking people up, not supporting Donald Trump.
Well, the thing is, again, we can do both. We can work towards a free voluntary society, and we can also support Donald Trump, because he will make life, if he wins, he's less likely to start World War III, which is going to put a hamper into any sort of attempt for a free society.
Yeah, that would definitely have some effect on all of our initiatives if we had World War III, for sure. So it's definitely this is an interesting topic. That's why I wanted to have you guys on. But now, Adam, you've essentially called Richard a cuck. Are you going to say that to his face?
Sure. I think in the sense that the Trump supporters are using the word cuck, cuckonservative, or cuckold to describe someone who, like a cuckold fetishist, takes a smaller role in society by supporting someone ruling over them, just like any active statist who endorses the idea of someone ruling over them. Yes, you fit into the category of a cuckold.
Well, sorry, but that's not actually what the term means. The term genuinely refers to someone who sells out their own in-group so they can moralize and basically get moral high ground from the far left.
Richard, the
so
term
you're
has
actually
some
using
broader...
You're actually using the term incorrectly, just so you know.
Well, how would you respond to?
Well, the term as
it's
it's been used in alt-right circles, it's not to refer to someone who wants power over them. It refers to someone who sells out their in-group.
Sure, all right. The term cuckonservative was actually originated, as you state, but the term cuck and using cuckold in this manner came from 4chan a whole generation before it was embraced by the alt-right movement. So to use the word cuckold in the more general sense as a metaphor for what the precise definition is, as a husband whose wife is cheating on him or endorses his wife having sex with another man, I think it's entirely appropriate to apply it here. So
I don't think it. Here's the thing. I don't like this. Isn't some cult of personality. I don't call Donald Trump daddy like some might. But the thing, I look at Donald Trump as a tool, as a battering ram against the political establishment, our enemies, the people who disenfranchised Ron Paul, the people who are profiting off the current political paradigm. So I'm using Donald Trump as a weapon against our mutual enemies. So no, your humorous example or metaphor does not hold water here.
Well, just the fact that 4chan did anything a generation before anything is kind of freaking me out. How old am I now?
Maybe
I
not an
guess it's
actual 20-year generation, Jeff, but a generation of thought on the internet at least.
Okay. Still, time's really speeding up now with the internet. So I guess this really comes down to is Trump really any sort of force for any sort of good? I guess that's what it really comes down to, because you both said you would support someone like Ron Paul if he was running, and you're both anarchists. So that's another whole issue, right? Should anarchists even support anyone who's involved in any way in the political system? And I know, Adam, you've already announced you're going to be running for president in 2020, so you obviously have no qualms about getting involved in the political system. So it really comes down to, is Trump what Richard thinks he is, or is he actually just another one of these people who are just going to keep the system going the same way it has been?
Well, considering how much he's flip-flopped on his own positions of rather dangerous statist policies, I don't think you can even trust what he says about where he stands now.
Well,
personally, I don't think the president really decides anything. If Trump tried to change the system, he'd be assassinated pretty quickly.
Right, and that's why changing the paradigm is what really counts.
Okay, but the thing is, here's the thing. If Trump wasn't an outsider, the Republican establishment wouldn't have coalesced around Kasich and Cruz. Basically, they're working together not to get the nomination now, but simply to deny Trump the nomination. The numerous PACs have dumped millions of dollars into these people. One way or another, the Republican establishment and the political establishment in general is worried about him. And what Adam said earlier about the enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend, maybe not my friend, but we can make temporary alliances. And I feel that this is how political change happens, right? You know, the political arena is one arena. It's not the only arena. It's not the only way we can make change, but it's one arena and where change is very possible. Now, I don't see the net benefit of abandoning that and pounding my chest about how ideologically pure I am.
No response, Adam?
Well, I haven't been pounding my chest, so I don't know what he's talking about. Should I just
metaphorically speaking?
Would that make this debate
metaphorically
easier for you guys?
speaking? I suppose I should have added that.
I don't really get this whole debate, really. It's like Richard is basically saying that he thinks Trump might be of some help, and so he's supporting in some ways to get that to happen. And Adam's saying he disagrees, and that's fine. Maybe actually, I'm not a good person to host debates. I don't see what the debate is, really.
Well, I think really that it comes down to, and this isn't real, Jeff, this part of the debate, I'll try to home in on something here that I do think is very important. And as someone who is supported by donations and people who buy my book from my store, even though we give it away for free online, and someone who has support from lots of other activists in the movement to do the activism that I'm doing, I do think that this is something that we should debate and that should be put up to scrutiny. And that is, how do we best dedicate the resources of the freedom movement? You know, and obviously that's an artificial construct that I have in my head that's different from what you have in your head. And, you know, for someone who wants to invest energy in supporting Donald Trump, I don't know if they qualify in my head as part of my movement, because, you know, I don't want to support people who are raging violent statists who support really dangerous controlling policies. But if you let me get into this a little bit more and take it back to where we started, every single argument that I've ever heard about why a libertarian should support Donald Trump would apply just as well, if not more so, to other candidates in the race. And
which ones?
That being the case, I've done some examination of the people who are supporting him. And if you look at the personality types, Christopher Cantwell seems to be one of the leading voices here. And really typical of a lot of the alt-right, white male angst that we see around the neo-reactionary movement today, that is based on a lot of insecurity about, as Richard said, Western civilization, or the white race or Americanism. And I'm not trying to throw out any claims of racism. I think that's going too far, although there are a lot of people who for whom that label would fit. But that there is a certain insecurity among those who are turning to Trump, libertarians and non-libertarians. So the question that I have to ask, and this is really important in terms of
Really?
how we get led astray, and you know, hearing Richard talk about all the different things and how the Republican establishment and the mainstream media is relating to Donald Trump, like all of a sudden we fall for the show on the mainstream media. All of a sudden we believe that none of this is just totally staged and fabricated and made up. And so why is it that these particular people
Can I
personality
address that?
types?
Because it's kind of going on a tangent now. And yes, I've
Well,
heard the
can I
argument
finish
before.
the point? 'Cause
Everyone who supports
Richard, if you don't
Trump is
mind,
insecure. I'd like to ask you, Adam, how many have, you know, I know you've got a degree in psychology, but even the best, most talented psychologists have to, you know, sit down with a patient and have at least a few sessions with them before they make such broad, sweeping psychological analysis. And I don't think you have. How many actual conversations have you had with actual people who are supporting Trump? And I want to talk again about your insecurity about Western civilization. Look, man, the Western civilization
I'm not insecure
is
about
the
Western
genesis of
civilization. I'm
liberty.
saying that you are.
No, it comes from the English common law tradition, Adam Smith's in his invisible hand, the Magna Carta. All these things are directly from Western civilization, and Western civilization is the culture, is where the culture of liberty came from. It didn't come from the Middle East. It didn't come from Asia. It came from the West. So if you're going to throw the entire civilization that birthed liberty under the bus, I don't think we're going to have another opportunity to create it anywhere else. It's here or it's done. And the idea, here's the thing, I'll give Adam one point, the idea of there's some people are waking up to Western chauvinism and white identity. I'm not a white identitarian, but I am a Western chauvinist. The reason for this is you've got basic communist ideologues in the universities spouting communist propaganda. You've got, if you look at the people who are opposing Trump, you've got the Republican and political establishment on the one side, and you've got far left-wing ideologues on the other side, whose goal is to destroy the West. It's been for 100 years, so they can bring about some sort of communist revolution. The idea of racism in and of itself is a faulty frame. It's a faulty idea. The term racism was coined by Vladimir Lenin to discredit the West and bring in communism. The idea, what does exist is in-group preferences. Certain groups prefer their own groups. That's completely and utterly natural. As human beings, we all have, we're naturally tribal individuals. And I think the most natural tribalism is probably in-group preference towards race. Now, I don't have that. I'm with a black chick, so you can throw that out the window. But to think that this is some sort of horrible idea, dude, human beings are tribal. All it depends, the only question is, where does our tribalism come from? What do we see as our tribe? Personally, I see Western civilization and people who value free markets, private property, and individual liberty. That is my tribe.
Okay, well, Jeff, if you noticed, Richard there really kind of proved my point, and I'll address this question about how much experience I have with Trump supporters. I just did a whole series of interviews in Vegas. I've got one of them posted on my YouTube channel already. If you go to youtube.com/Adam Kokesh, you can see me talking to Trump supporters. There's going to be more of those videos coming. I've had a number of conversations with people online. I've read a lot of articles from people who are Trump supporters. And what Richard is demonstrating here by his interruptions, I don't know if it's the connection, but it sounds like his voice is getting a little high-pitched and a little cracking. And it sounds like he's got a certain emotional investment in this that would suggest that there is some ego investment beyond a cool, rational decision to invest energy in supporting a particular candidate. I think if you stay cool, calm, rational, and you're able to put the emotional draws of Donald Trump aside, seeing a big alpha male out there, alpha mailing his way through the primary, which could just be a completely staged show, I think you'll be able to sit back and calmly see that we should be investing our resources where they're most efficient in waking people up. And so I'm going to stay committed to that activism. And for the people who want to join me, they know where to find me.
Well,
Any
again,
final words, Richard?
Adam hasn't talked to me. This is the most I've ever talked to him. He hasn't even tried to, get to know me as a person or know me. He's doing some pseudo-psychological bullshit, so it's whatever.
I mean, it's not pseudo psychology. It's like basic principles of how people think.
Dude, you
and how
don't even
people
know
operate.
me to diagnose me as some sort of this, that, or the other. You don't know me. Even the best psychologist in the world would have to have a couple sessions with someone before they can make such broad, sweeping. Go there.
I'm not making a broad analysis. I'm simply pointing out that you clearly have an emotional investment in this, and where you're coming from is.
Interesting. Everyone went quiet. So I think the point that Adam might have been trying to make was that some people who do support Trump are definitely seem to have certain personality traits that I've noticed that as well, obviously. But obviously not anyone who supports Trump has those personality traits. I think, when you talk about someone like Chris Cantwell, who's I don't even want to mention his name, but he's you could just tell he's got this deep down hidden neo-Nazi inside of him. Actually, I'll talk a little bit about that.
Well, see, now Jeff, I'll come to Cantwell's defense there and say that that is some pseudo-psychological overjudgment to say that he's got a neo-Nazi inside of him.
That's my take on him. From what I've known him fairly well, and I'll bring up Stefan Molyneux. When I saw him really seem to, I haven't followed him, to be honest. There's a lot of Molly bots out there who all want to get angry at me. I didn't watch more than 10 minutes of any of his videos, but there seemed to be a lot on Trump. And he seems to talk a lot about the importance of keeping certain people out. When I saw that, because I know Stefan Molyneux personally, I recognize that as being more of a personal sort of a personality trait, more than and letting go of his principles somewhat. That was my take on it. So I guess that's what you're trying to say about Richard, is that he has this sort of traits, personalities, style that attracts
hold on, Jeff.
people to Trump.
Jeff. I want to cut you off right there, because I want to be really careful about what I said about Richard specifically, as opposed to my general observations about Trump supporters. And I want to separate those, because I don't want to offend Richard or to be presumptuous about anything about him. And all I'm saying...
Well, it's a little too late for that, man. You've already made these broad, sweeping psychological analysis.
No, but that was about...
Which I don't think you're qualified to do.
Okay, well, the audience can be the judge of that. But the judgment of Trump supporters in general was one thing. And again, this further proves my point, though, about Richard in conflating those two things, because all I said about Richard, I believe, was this, that I was making an observation about his engagement in this conversation and how that revealed a certain emotional investment in this that I think prevents or shows that a lack of would tend to indicate an absence of calm, cool, clear-headed thinking. And Richard,
I've actually done a lot of calm, cool, clear-headed thinking about this. So you're making broad, sweeping analysis. You haven't, just because we're having a heated exchange, that happens with political arguments. We have heated exchanges. You don't know my thought process with Trump. I've done a lot of thinking. I've done a lot of writing. I've done a lot of pondering when it comes to Trump. I have concerns that are addressed by the Trump campaign. I don't think it's a perfect manifestation of libertarian ideals, but I don't think perfect should be the enemy of good.
Well, I do know the case that you stated at the beginning of this conversation for supporting Trump. I do know that all of those arguments would apply to other candidates. And I know from your engagement in this conversation that you have an emotional investment in it. So it would be rational to inquire as to what that is.
Don't you have an emotional investment in your ideas, man? Don't you have an emotional investment in your position?
In the positions that I have, that I've thought out rationally and I'm confident, I'm able to communicate them without interrupting other people or without getting heated or changing the tone of my voice unnecessarily in a way that makes me a less effective communicator of those ideas. And Richard, I started out coming from a similar kind of emotional investment in a conversation kind of mentality that you seem to be in right now. And I really attribute a lot of my success as if you followed any of my activism history over the last 8 years as a public figure, that I've gone through quite a transformation. I've actually evolved a lot in my thinking and my demeanor and the way that I communicate, but also in my deeper perspective and understanding of the world and the message of freedom and how we achieve a free society. And if I could just help you out a little bit, I would suggest that you look into those things that might help you in your life, whether it's meditation or yoga or seeking, any kind of better centeredness that would allow you to engage in a conversation like this in a calmer, more rational, persuasive manner, and that'll make you more effective.
Let's not talk about why are we talking about
like
personalities? I came here to talk about issues. I didn't come here to talk about my personality. I didn't come here to talk about your personality. I came here to talk about facts.
Well, you've
been
talking about Trump
more
than issues.
Well, yeah, I'm talking about Trump. I had a lot of facts about immigration lined up. I had a lot of facts about his actual policies and the implications of them, even libertarian implications as far as, open borders and closed borders. And to me, this conversation has devolved in some psychological analysis of another human being, and it's irrelevant.
No, I agree.
I could be wrong about everything. Everything you say about me could be right, and it still doesn't debunk my position. It doesn't mean that my position is flawed.
Oh, we already addressed your position.
Why do we have to talk about psychological
let me cut you off, Richard.
nonsense?
I agree. Like, this has gone a little too much towards the psychological aspects. Let's talk about some real issues before we end this. Let's talk about borders. That's another issue that anarchists really seem to have problems with what's going on in Europe with the refugees and all that. Seems to have changed a lot of anarchists into pro-borders. What's your take on borders, Richard? Are you pro-borders?
Well, I think the principal libertarian state position is not for borders. The idea is not for open borders. Excuse me. There's an idea in libertarian circles that open borders are libertarian. I think that's false. A libertarian society, you would not have a society where people could just come and go willy-nilly. People would have to have directly invited by a person to get into a society or an area. The idea that the state property should be treated like an open frontier doesn't work, because one way or another, the citizens of a state, they fund that area, whether it's through coercion or not. They still have a more legitimate claim to state assets because of taxes than outsiders do. So I think in a libertarian society, there would be strict border controls unless people had expressed consent expressed invitation by a landowner or had legitimate business.
What would those borders be defined by then, and who would be enforcing those controls, Richard?
Well, I think if you look at the state now as like some sort of trustee, they're, like, for example, if you lived in a society, you could invite me to come and stay on your property, but you would have to bear the cost of that. I'd have to stay on your property, and you'd have to bear whatever cost that was expensive, right? Whatever expenses, you'd have to cover that. It would be unlibertarian for you to expect the rest of the society to pay for it. There's a lot of according to the Heritage Foundation in 2010, the average illegal immigrant household received about $24,000 in government benefits. While they did pay $10,000 in taxes, that was still a net deficit of over $14,000.
Well, the proper position, if you believe in the doctrine of free will, which is the definition of libertarian, is that the only borders in existence that are truly legitimate are those that are defined by private property. And it's certainly okay in a free society for people to combine their resources and create a general area in which they want to have a mutual security force, but that would have to be defined by them coming together voluntarily. And when you say that the government can't treat its own land like an open frontier, you're saying that the government has to exist as some sort of land monopoly and claim land that it has no legitimate claim to. So the position really falls down when held up against libertarian principles. It's not that the correct position is open borders. The correct position based on libertarian philosophy and principles of freedom and voluntarism is that the only borders you can have are those defined by private property, and it's unethical to restrict anybody's freedom of movement in any way unless they are interfering with your property or someone's private property who you have been hired and directly contracted.
Well,
to
I think
secure
you're
for them.
you're missing the point a bit, Adam. My point was that taxpayers, because they've invested into the property in the form of taxes, have a more legitimate claim to that property than say outsiders do. That was my point, and that's perfectly
hold on. How does
perfectly
a taxpayer
congruent with libertarians.
Oh, no. Now you're bringing in a whole set of contradictory arguments here, because paying taxes means that money has been stolen from me. That's not that I've invested in anything.
Sure.
And I don't have any claim.
It's a forced.
Excuse me?
Sure, it's a forced. It's forced, but the thing is that money that is stolen, that's taken, is used to maintain the public lands, and therefore.
No, it's
the
not.
People who
And
have
public
taken
lands
have
are...
the people who've taken that have had that money taken for them to maintain that property have a more legitimate claim on it than the people who have not invested in it, whether that investment is forced or not.
That's only true if the government has a legitimate claim to that property in the first place, and it doesn't. It simply cannot, as an unethical institution, as a group of individuals calling themselves government, claim to own any of that property legitimately. So there's no way that
the people who do have their property taken from them and spent on something, they do have a legitimate claim to it. They have a legitimate claim to it because they've paid for it.
We haven't paid for the millions of acres that are simply sitting unclaimed, sequestered from development by the United States government. No human being on Earth does.
They've been claimed. They have been actually, because the government's taken that money, and the government claims that's the government's assets.
Okay,
and
so are you?
I would argue
hold on a second. I just want to clarify.
Please let me finish. Please let me finish. If the government's assets should the only people who have a legitimate claim to the government's assets are the people whose money has been taken from them to maintain and hold this. The government takes your money, and it has assets. In a just society, the people, the assets of the government would be removed and given to the people whose assets was paid to maintain the corporation of the government.
So all that land should be privatized down to the individual American, basically.
Something around that lines. They should, at some rate, something should happen with that land. But I'm saying that American citizens have more legitimate claim to it than outsiders, because they've been paid. They've paid for it. They've paid to maintain the corporation of the government, and the government has assets. So those assets justly should be taken back to the people who paid for them.
All right, so Jeff, if you're gonna let Richard interrupt me and then interrupt me from jumping in by saying, let me finish, I don't know where this is going, but the case for a government managing collective property goes against everything that libertarians supposedly stand for. I feel like I'm talking to a conservative now who's arguing for some collective security thing that's beyond the scope of libertarianism in terms of how should government do this, how should government do that, when the libertarian position is government should not.
Well,
but it's a valid question, though. How do we deal with there is government today. There is this thing that's extorting people all over the place. How do we deal with it? And so I can kind of understand why people have different opinions on that. That they're still libertarian or still anarchist.
Well, let's not support.
They might feel like there is some. How do we deal with this? We're all being extorted. How do we deal with how to deal with all this?
And
stuff?
This is where our principles provide a very important guidance for us, that we shouldn't endorse any efforts that further entrench statism or ask for greater coercion to be done on our behalf.
I don't think what I advocated was anything was greater coercion. I think the greater coercion is allowing people to come in to the government, to the nation, and then allowing them to kind of live off the proceeds of the government, because the government wants more and more immigration, and because the people who immigrate and live off the government will vote to expand the state and expand the welfare state. The argument I got was actually I got it from Hans Hermann Hoppe. I think it's a very principled. Now you would disagree with me, and that's fine. But to think that that just because I disagree with you, I'm not a libertarian, I think is wrong.
I really see that if libertarianism means the belief in the doctrine of free will, that includes freedom of movement, and that the only limit to the freedom of that movement should be private property. Government-held property
in a
is
vacuum,
not
you're
private
right. In a vacuum, you're absolutely right. But the thing is, there's other factors involved, such as the welfare state and democracy, the democratic system. Also, if you allow more and more people to come in and you give them government handouts, they're going to vote to expand the welfare state. I don't see how that's a controversial
Well, you're
proposal.
using a lot of statist language in there, like let them in, give them handouts, things like that. And I think it's really important to be a lot more precise in this language. What the government does is steal from us in order to create a welfare state, right? So the idea that in order to limit how much it steals from us, we should ask it to induce greater coercive programs that restrict freedom of movement is simply endorsing the idea of statism and piling on. And if anything,
I disagree because
legitimizing.
I want to apply how the real world would work under in a libertarian society to the current situation. And in the current situation, you would not have unregulated movement. You would not have unowned public land. There would just be everything would be privatized. So the idea
Have you ever bought land, Richard? Have you ever bought
Pardon?
land?
No, my father has land, though.
Have you ever dealt with easements or right-of-ways or built a road or anything like that? So do you have any idea how that works in terms of property sharing agreements and how roads are actually developed in a free society and how people decide who maintains what roads and where they go and who's responsible for them while they're all on private property?
Well, I feel that you want to enlighten me, so by all means.
Well, it's really not a very complicated process, and I didn't know about it very intimately myself until I bought the piece of land that I'm sitting on right now, where we have, as per the government here, mandatory setbacks associated with easements and right-of-ways for people in order for them to be able to access their property beyond ours, because it would be unethical for us to use our property to limit access to other people's. And so what we have here is the government actually providing what is a bad approximation, but still an approximation of what the free market would provide for how people can get along and share resources and have private roads and be able to have that kind of freedom of movement. And what we have here is actually a wonderful microcosm of in Juniper Wood Ranch, which is entirely private property, where we have roads that are all on private property, and yet people with private property separate from other private property within the ranch are able to get along and share those resources, and it's not a problem for people to be able to have that access and freedom of movement. And I totally fault myself for not having examined this issue more thoroughly myself before buying this piece of land. I had a vague understanding of it, but it's really unfortunate that because the government has for so long had a sort of land monopoly, that people don't actually consider these issues, that they've just been sort of thrown out and trusted to the government. And some of the objections that you raise to the concept of a private property-based society that allows for freedom of movement on private property is really showing a lot of ignorance of all the different mechanisms for how this would work and how people could get along and how all of the legitimate aims of a free society in terms of providing security and protection would be achieved without having to do these mental gymnastics and backflips that you're going through in order to justify the existence of state borders.
Well, the thing is, I think there's going to be borders in any society. I think there's going to be borders. You're not just going to
private property borders.
There'll be some restriction in some places and less restriction in others.
Well,
but
it's not in.
I think I do think that the idea of just letting of allowing unmitigated immigration to people who, like, it would be one thing if these immigrants were housed on private property
from an ethical perspective.
An individual, may I please finish? An individual were to bear the cost. If a single individual were to bear the cost, that's one thing. But when you've got a welfare state that subsidizes, people who can't pay their way and stuff like that, I don't think it is libertarian just to have them there. I don't think it's libertarian to allow, I don't know what other rhetoric to use, Adam. I guess I'm just a horrible statist, but I don't understand how bringing people into a geographical landmass known as a nation, a country, to take welfare from and be a burden to the inhabitants is a libertarian position.
Well, first of all, the concept of a nation is a construct of the government to begin with, and more importantly...
Actually, I misspoke. I meant country. The nation is actually something complete. A nation is completely different from a government, from a state. But that was my fault. I misspoke.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you can justify doing something unethical, that is interfering with someone's freedom of movement, because someone else, namely the state, is doing something unethical, stealing from us and giving it to people in the form of welfare. That is not an ethical position. If someone else is doing something unethical, you should stop that.
It's a pragmatic
doing something
position.
else unethical is not an appropriate response to that. I own this property. And if I invite someone from anywhere in the world to visit me on my property, it is unethical for you or any government or any institution to impede their freedom of movement to come and visit me on my property. Now, if they, on their way to my property, cross through government-controlled territory where government steals from you and gives them money, that does not change this fundamental ethical principle that gives you the right to block their freedom of movement.
Well, the fact of the matter is, but you're talking in a vacuum. I think
that's the real world.
You're right. You're right. If you can give people, to have people on your land, that's one thing. But these people aren't going to places to just be guests. They're going to live off public housing, get public money. They live a lot on the dole of others, and to say that to stop them from living off the labor and wealth of others is immoral, I think is kind of funny. It's a joke.
Actually, if the government is putting it out as a handout, it's not any initiation of force to accept that money. The initiation of force is in taxation. And what you're doing...
Sure it is. It's unprincipled to accept stolen money.
It's
immoral. It's immoral. If we want to talk about morality, it's immoral to accept stolen funds. And it's not immoral to stop people from doing that.
Then stopping them from receiving those funds is still a different issue from stopping their freedom of movement. And I have to talk like this and break it down
freedom
really
of movement,
slow,
I don't think there exists such a thing, because freedom of movement is
and maybe if you listen to a complete
private
sentence,
property.
You'd be open to hearing how these ideas actually fit together in a coherent, rational way. But when you keep interrupting, you don't see that there's an complete
Where's my
logical
whistle?
chain of
Okay,
thought
I'm going to
here.
interrupt this time. You guys both asked me to keep this under an hour, and we're almost at an hour now. That was really good, though. A lot of good information. I think a lot of people have questions about these things as libertarians, and you both presented different sides to it. If you like this information, please put in the comments down below what you thought of it. If you disagree with either of them, please do that. Let us know if you like this format. I'll give you both a minute or so, if you'd like, to finish up and let people know if you want to plug your products or whatever you're doing, or just finish up with however you'd like. Whoever wants to go first. Go first, Richard.
All right. Well, I just think that it's great to have principles, but I think we have to live in the real world. I think we have to take into account factors that aren't accounted for by just a mindless ideological dogmatism. Like, I get it. It's really easy just to say, I'm a libertarian. I'm going to advocate this no matter what. But I think to forward our agenda in the real world, we might have to re-examine some of our positions and tweak them to match the real circumstances in the world. And I know this is not going to be a popular thing for many libertarians to hear, because I think that it becomes almost a virtue signaling for many libertarians. I'm principled. Well, good for you, man. Good for you. But unless we can actually affect change in the real world, what's the point having principles if we become so tied ideologically that the agenda our principles would want us to pursue becomes lost in it?
And let people know about Liberty
Oh, yeah,
Machine
my
News.
website is libertymachinennews.com. There you go. You can find me. Check out my documentary, Hidden Influence, The Rise of Collectivism. Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Yeah, great documentary. I'll put a link to that down below. Hidden Influence, The Rise of Collectivism. I believe I was in that one, or I was in one of them. I'm in a lot of stuff. Yeah. I'm busy, yeah. Adam, go ahead. Final comments.
I think throughout history we've seen that the most important changes in society and social organization in the broader paradigm have come from people standing on principle and establishing a more principled society by that example. This isn't to say that we can compromise our principles and still advance them. That's what flies in the face of reality. And I think it's really important that we examine how our principles apply to the real world, not how we can twist our principles to fit certain temptations that are put in front of us by the mainstream media, by the government, by the rest of society. And I look forward to having more conversations like this, although I hope that they could be maybe a little more listening based, so that everybody involved can have an examination of the principles involved and the logic and rationality that leads us to what we do in our activism and how we actually affect real change. I think what I've been able to do with my activism is a demonstration of how sending out a principled message can bring about real change. And our book Freedom, that I started writing when I was in jail, is now in its 4th printing. We have over 1.5 million downloads. It's already a banned book in US prisons and jails, which means, you know, we're doing something right with this. And what we see is a growing movement of people who are embracing the principles of freedom. That's how we bring about real change. And as any observer of government knows, it is always a reflection of the paradigm. If we want to change it, we have to change the paradigm. We have to limit the tolerance for oppression of the oppressed. We have to wake people up to the message of freedom. And that's what my activism is about. So I hope you'll check out the book. It's just 100 pages. There's a free 3-hour audiobook at thefreedomline.com. Every digital format possible is free there. There are no intellectual copyright claims. You can also, from thefreedomline.com, find me on all the social media networks, as well as YouTube, where I'm posting videos 5 days a week now and doing more man on the street interviews, talking to Donald Trump supporters, revealing their emotional investments and irrational reasoning in coming to the conclusion of supporting Donald Trump. So I hope you'll join me in that and in spreading this message, because people are waking up faster than ever. And the sooner we end the state, it means that there will be that many less days of war and violence and oppression and the great ripoff that the statist paradigm that the institutions of government represent now. So share this message, wake people up, and share the beauty and the joy of freedom with people, because that's what inspires people to embrace a different way of looking at the world.
That's great. We'll have links to Adam's book down below and any other things that he mentioned there. This is my final comment. I believe that both Richard and Adam are both incredibly passionate about liberty. I think the way we get to liberty and what's going on, how we deal with liberty today, and how we can, what will happen once we do have more liberty, is all up to discussion. And that's what we did today. And they both presented different sides to different ways they think that we should be going about it. I think we should be going about it every single way. And I think by having these conversations is excellent for us to decide what might be best for us. So if you enjoyed this conversation, if you enjoyed this debate format, let us know. Like, subscribe, share down below as well. And please put comments in on whether you liked it or what you disagreed with or what you didn't like or anything like that, so we can know if we should do more things like this in the future. But we have one main goal, and that is de-enslavement of all the people on this planet. We're all trying to work towards that. And let's keep our real eye on fighting the real enemy, which is the people who want to enslave us. So that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.